In a remote labor camp in Siberia, German prisoners of war endure harsh conditions. Despite the absence of fences or guards, the bitter cold of -40 degrees in the Arctic makes escape nearly impossible. The prisoners know that without food and warmth, survival is a distant dream. However, one soldier, Clemens Farrell, refuses to accept this fate. Driven by the desire to reunite with his wife and daughter, he is determined to break free. When an opportunity to escape arises, Clemens seizes it. He stealthily moves along a conveyor belt, slips away unnoticed, and jumps into a coal car. As the car begins to move, he looks up at the starry night sky, feeling a glimmer of hope. But his hope is short-lived. The coal car suddenly stops, blocked by a wooden stake. Confused and anxious, Clemens peeks out and is spotted by a Soviet guard. The penalty for attempting to escape is severe, being thrown into an open-air dungeon. The weather worsens, with heavy rain soaking Clemens to the bone. Despite the freezing cold, he endures 3 days and nights in the dungeon. When he is finally released, the camp director smugly informs him that his fellow inmates are waiting. Clemens soon understands the meaning of these words. As he returns to the mine, he is confronted by his fellow prisoners, who are furious and armed with clubs. They have gone hungry for 3 days because of his escape attempt. In a fit of rage, they beat the weakened Clemens until he collapses. Fortunately, someone intervenes and takes him to the infirmary. The doctor, also a prisoner of war, shares Clemens' beliefs and admires his courage. He treats Clemens with care and compassion. Desperate, Clemens begs the doctor to help him escape again. But the doctor explains that escaping from this remote Arctic camp is nearly impossible. In the past, those who tried to flee usually met a grim fate. The doctor reveals a shocking secret to Clemens Farrell: even those who have no intention of escaping will eventually die. The prisoners dig for heavy metals every day, and prolonged exposure to lead will inevitably lead to death by lead poisoning. Since death is inevitable, the doctor suggests taking a chance and trying to escape for better luck. Determined to help until the end, the doctor decides to assist Clemens Farrell in escaping. He quickly takes off his sweater and retrieves fur boots and warm clothes from the cupboard. Clemens Farrell immediately puts on the clothes. The doctor informs him that there are hidden supplies of food along the railway line and hands him a handgun, urging him to use it when necessary. These provisions were originally prepared by the doctor himself for his own escape. However, a month ago, he was diagnosed with cancer, and with his weakened condition, he would not be able to withstand the extreme cold weather. The doctor also gives Clemens Farrell a lunchbox with his home address written on it, entrusting him to inform his family of his death if he is fortunate enough to successfully escape. With that, Clemens Farrell sets foot on the path of escape once again under the cover of night. The next morning, the prison director realizes that Clemens Farrell is missing and rushes to the doctor's room to question him. He discovers that the doctor had already sacrificed himself for his fellow countrymen, while Clemens Farrell, filled with conviction, braves the vast expanse of snow and wind. Meanwhile, the prison director orders a search within a 30-kilometer radius. However, despite several days of searching, the soldiers find no trace of Clemens Farrell. Everyone assumes he is already frozen to death, but the warden believes he is still alive and orders the soldiers to continue expanding the search area. On the 9th day of his escape, Clemens Farrell suddenly notices a sled chasing after him from behind. Seeing this, he sprints away. However, in his haste, he drops his backpack, and as the sled quickly catches up to him, he slips and falls, ending up sprawled on the ground. But to his surprise, when the sled passes over him, he realizes he is unharmed. Startled, he understands that the entire incident had been a hallucination created by his mind. Looking at the endless expanse of ice and snow around him, Clemens Farrell feels bewildered. He can't predict how much longer he can endure because his remaining food supply is nearly depleted. Despairing, he kneels down in the snow, praying for some divine intervention to provide him with food. However, in the barren Arctic Circle, there is nothing but snow as far as the eye can see. In this state, Clemens Farrell has no choice but to continue dragging his exhausted body for a few more days. Eventually, Clemens' strength gave out, and he collapsed from hunger and fatigue. He couldn't tell how much time had passed when, in a dreamlike state, he faintly heard a strange sound. Eagerly following the sound, he discovered a seal not far away. It was as if he had glimpsed hope once again. He immediately pulled out the handgun from his pocket, desperately steadying his trembling hands, and fired several shots at the seal. Unfortunately, his marksmanship was terrible, and he missed every shot. Seeing the seal about to escape, Clemens hastily got up to chase it. However, he accidentally stepped into the icy water, but he endured the pain and continued the pursuit. In the end, he was lucky enough to hit the seal. He used a small knife to cut open the seal's belly and then inserted his frozen feet into the seal's body for warmth. Next, he heated the seal's fat in a cooking pot and applied it to his feet to treat frostbite, using strips of cloth as bandages. After a brief rest, Clemens rose once again and continued his journey. In this desolate and never-ending snowy landscape, he could easily lose his mind. He had to rely on talking to himself, constantly maintaining his sanity. To avoid getting lost, he used a compass to correct his direction after every stretch of walking. After a few more days of travel, he spotted a small tree in the snow. Clemens was overwhelmed with joy and stumbled toward it, embracing the tree as if he had grasped a lifeline. This indicated that after 2 months of arduous escape, he had essentially left the frigid Arctic Circle behind. Meanwhile, the prison warden refused to give up and continued to expand the search range, issuing a wanted notice and setting up checkpoints. Clemens had already entered the forest, but to his surprise, a sudden blizzard arose shortly after he started walking. The winds were so strong that they could lift him off the ground, and even sturdy trees were uprooted. Just as he stood up, a large tree fell behind him, pinning him underneath. Luckily, 2 passing gold prospectors rescued Clemens from his predicament. And so, the 3 of them helped and supported each other as they journeyed together. As the season of rejuvenation arrived, they decided to travel down the river on a makeshift raft. They enjoyed the beautiful scenery and engaged in lively conversations, sharing their life stories. However, the river suddenly became turbulent, and Clemens and Matan couldn't control the raft's direction. Eventually, Semjon lost his balance and fell into the river. Seeing Semjon about to be submerged by the rushing waters, Clemens disregarded his own safety and immediately jumped in to rescue him. It was a struggle, but he managed to pull Semjon back to shore. Meanwhile, Matan abandoned them and rowed the raft away alone. Upon returning to their shelter, Clemens assumed that Semjon had drowned. Thinking he had struck gold, Matan stole all of Semjon's precious belongings. But to his surprise, Semjon returned just in time. Faced with Matan's heartless betrayal, Semjon took decisive action and ended his life with a gunshot. The 2 remaining companions packed their belongings and set off on their journey once again. Soon, winter arrived, and the journey back home became increasingly difficult. Clemens Farrell intended to share the burden of Semjon's belongings, but Semjon mistook his intentions for an attempt to steal his gold. In a swift motion, Semjon struck Clemens with his bag, causing him to tumble down the mountain. The impact rendered Clemens unconscious. When he regained consciousness, he found himself surrounded by a pack of wolves closing in on him. Clemens quickly climbed a small tree, but the wolves persisted, tearing at his pant legs with their jaws. Despite his efforts, the tree eventually snapped, and he was on the verge of becoming the wolves' meal. At that moment, gunshots rang out in the distance. Several wolves had been killed, and it turned out local herders had come to his rescue. They brought Clemens back to their village, where the compassionate herders took care of him. With their help, Clemens' body quickly recovered, and the warmth he experienced after so long made him feel a sense of belonging. He developed a deep friendship with the herders. However, the prison warden's wanted notice reached the village, leaving him with no choice but to continue his escape. Before his departure, the herders provided him with supplies and gifted him a hunting dog. The journey back home became less lonely with the loyal dog by his side. And so, they traveled together for another year. One day, they arrived at a lumber mill. The hungry dog ran straight into the logging area in search of food but was driven away by the workers. When Clemens called out, the workers recognized him immediately. The owner of the lumber mill first offered him food and drink, and then arranged for Clemens to board a train bound for Germany. With his homecoming within reach, a radiant smile appeared on Clemens' face. However, he was unaware that the lumber mill owner had reported him. The prison warden had already assembled soldiers and was waiting at the train station. Fortunately, Clemens noticed the unusual situation and managed to evade the soldiers by circling around the train. Unfortunately, he was caught by the prison warden at the crucial moment. Just as all hope seemed lost, the hunting dog bravely intervened, pouncing on the warden and fiercely biting him. Its loyalty bought Clemens Farrell another chance to escape. Hearing gunshots behind him, the hunting dog was shot dead. Clemens Farrell couldn't dwell on his grief and continued running. In a moment of urgency, he climbed onto an overpass and jumped onto a passing train. Once again, he narrowly escaped. And so, he traveled tirelessly, moving forward. Time flew by, and it was now 1952. Clemens Farrell, disheveled and penniless, stared hungrily at a delicious plate of hand-pulled noodles. However, the owner promptly kicked him out. Feeling helpless, he approached a pancake vendor, where the friendly girls welcomed him, but he had no money in his pockets. Sensing the situation, Clemens Farrell left dejectedly. Suddenly, a kind-hearted girl broke off a piece of flatbread and had her child give it to Clemens Farrell. Startled by the boy's gesture, Clemens Farrell hesitated for a moment before realizing he had been given a warm and steaming flatbread. However, this act caught the attention of a Jewish man. Clemens Farrell took the flatbread and sought refuge in a nearby church, where he clasped his hands together and earnestly prayed. The Jewish man, who had followed him, witnessed the scene but did not report him. Instead, as a former prisoner of war himself, he brought Clemens to his dwelling. After freshening up, Clemens Farrell transformed back to his original appearance. The Jewish man even provided him with a passport and travel documents. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Clemens Farrell arrived at the Soviet border with the passport in hand. After the inspection, he was indeed allowed to pass. Suppressing his inner excitement, fearing he might burst into laughter, he finally tasted freedom. But just as he reached the midpoint of the sewer bridge at the border, a beam of strong light shone upon his face. Through the brightness, he recognized the familiar face of the prison warden. Clemens Farrell panicked. It turned out the warden had been waiting there all along. He hastily glanced behind and realized he was still standing on Soviet soil, and the warden still had the authority to arrest him. Clenching his fists, Clemens Farrell felt a deep sense of injustice. All those years of arduous escape seemed futile. However, to his surprise, the warden stepped aside, clearing a path for him. Clemens Farrell couldn't believe it, but he cautiously walked past. The warden, as a soldier, had been ultimately won over by Clemens Farrell's 7 years of courageous escape. That's why he chose to let him go. Overcoming numerous obstacles, Clemens Farrell finally, on a snowy night, returned to his longed-for home. He observed his family's every move from outside the window, and the heartwarming scene filled Clemens Farrell with overwhelming emotions. At that moment, his wife and daughter prepared to leave for the church to pray, and Clemens Farrell quietly followed behind them. Right then, his daughter seemed to sense something. She slowly turned around and suddenly saw her long-lost father. The two of them embraced each other in excitement. His wife also approached, gently caressing her husband's face. The reunion before their eyes felt like a dream. The family wept tears of joy. Perhaps this is the true meaning of life. If you enjoyed the video, kindly subscribe and like the video for more videos.